My sister is being tortured downstairs, he cried. 16. Hell's Angels followed him. The night was still and quiet out on Route 9. Stars filled the sky above the tree line like someone had scattered salt across black velvet. The air smelled like pine trees and cool earth, the kind of clean smell that only comes after midnight when the world finally settles down and breathes. 16 motorcycles sat parked along the gravel shoulder of the road, their chrome catching the moonlight. The engines were off. The ride was done. And the men who owned those bikes stood around in small groups, laughing low, drinking coffee from a shared thermos, and letting the long night unwind from their shoulders. To anyone driving past, these men looked frightening. They were big, broad-shouldered, leather vests covered in patches, tattoos running up thick forearms and climbing toward weathered necks, boots worn down from years of road miles, faces that had seen hard things and did not try to hide it. But if you stopped long enough to watch them, you would see something different. You would see Ethan Brooks crouched beside the guardrail, carefully wrapping a bandage around the paw of a stray dog that had wandered out from the tree line. The dog was shaking. Ethan was speaking to it in a soft voice, like it was an old friend. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Easy, buddy. Nobody here is going to hurt you. You would see 2 other men passing around a brown paper bag full of sandwiches they had picked up in town earlier that evening, pressing extras into each other's hands without anyone asking. You would see Marcus Cole standing slightly apart from the rest, leaning against his motorcycle with his arms folded loosely and his eyes on the sky. Marcus was 45 years old. Not tall, but solid, built like someone who had worked hard his whole life and never stopped. His hair was dark with threads of silver running through it, cut close on the sides. A short beard framed a face that was calm and thoughtful. His vest bore the insignia of his chapter, worn with the kind of quiet pride that comes from decades of earning something real. The men respected Marcus, not because he demanded it, not because he raised his voice or made threats. They respected him because he never walked away from someone who needed help. That was the rule he lived by. Not written down anywhere, just understood by every man who rode beside him. Ethan walked over and stood next to him, the stray dog now curled safely near the tire of one of the parked bikes. "Good night," Ethan said, nodding toward the stars. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Good night." They had just come from a charity event 3 towns over, a fundraiser for a family that had lost their home to a fire. The Hells Angels had organized it quietly, the way they always did things. No cameras, no fuss. They just showed up and helped. That was enough for Marcus. That had always been enough. He was just reaching for the thermos when he heard it. At first it sounded like an animal crashing through the underbrush. Fast and clumsy and desperate, branches snapping, feet hitting gravel hard. Then the boy came out of the dark. He burst onto the shoulder of the road and stumbled forward, nearly falling face first before catching himself on both hands and scrambling back upright. He was young, 17 maybe, slim under a torn gray shirt that was dirty and dark with what looked like dried blood along the collar. His left eye was swollen almost shut. A cut ran across his cheekbone. His hands were scraped raw. He was shaking so hard his whole body seemed to vibrate. Every biker turned at once. The boy's eyes swept across them wildly, full of a fear that was so raw and real it hit like a cold wave. His chest heaved. He could barely get the words out. "My sister!" he gasped. He pressed a hand to his ribs. "Lily, she's downstairs. In the house back there." He pointed into the dark tree line behind him. "They're hurting her. Please, you have to help me. Please!" Nobody moved. Nobody except Marcus. He walked forward without hesitating, closing the distance between himself and the boy in 5 steady steps. He crouched down to eye level. His voice came out quiet and even. "Where is she?" The boy's chin trembled. He pointed again into the darkness beyond the trees. Marcus stood up straight. He turned back to his brothers. Every face was watching him. Waiting. "Start your engines," he said. Noah rode with Marcus. There was no other option. The boy could barely stand, let alone lead the way on foot. Marcus pulled him onto the back of his motorcycle without a word, and Noah grabbed hold with shaking hands as the engine came to life beneath them. The other 15 bikes roared awake one by one. The sound rolled through the trees like low thunder. They moved out onto the road in a tight group, headlights cutting through the dark, gravel popping under heavy tires. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. The kind of focus that settled over the group was something Marcus had seen before. It was the quiet that came before something serious. "Which way?" Marcus called back over his shoulder. "Left," Noah said. His voice was still rough and broken. "There's a dirt road about half a mile up. You almost miss it." Marcus nodded. The motorcycles leaned left as one. The paved road gave way to a narrow lane, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles. Tree branches reached over from both sides, brushing the tops of helmets as they passed. The headlights lit up tall weeds growing up through cracked dirt, a rusted mailbox with no name on it, and deep tire tracks pressed into the mud from something heavier than a regular car. Marcus clocked that detail. He said nothing. "How long has your sister been in there?" he asked. Noah's grip tightened behind him. 3 days. 3 days. Marcus kept his face steady. "How did she end up there?" Noah was quiet for a moment. The wind and the engines filled the silence. Then the words started coming out of him like something that had been sealed up too long and finally broke through. "There were sounds," Noah said. "Coming from that place. We live about a mile that way." He gestured vaguely to the right. "Lily kept hearing engines running at night. Late, real late. She told me about it, but I didn't pay it much attention. I thought maybe someone had moved in." He stopped, swallowed hard. "She went to check it out on her own. She didn't tell me she was going. I woke up and she was just gone." His voice cracked on that last word. "I looked everywhere. Then I remembered what she said about the sounds. I went to the house and I saw men out front and I tried to get inside and one of them hit me." He touched the side of his face carefully. "I ran. I kept trying to find someone to help, but nobody believed me. I was out there for hours." He stopped talking. The weight of those hours sat between them like something heavy and solid. Marcus did not offer empty comfort. He just said, "We're almost there." The trees opened up ahead, and the house appeared. It was 2 stories tall and completely dark. The windows were boarded over on the ground floor. Paint had peeled off the siding in long strips, leaving the wood gray and cracked underneath. A porch sagged across the front. One corner collapsed completely. The yard around it was overgrown and thick with weeds that came up past knee height. It looked abandoned, but those tire tracks in the mud told a different story. The bikers cut their engines and rolled to a stop. They dismounted quietly, moving with a steady purpose that came from years of trusting each other without needing instructions. Marcus turned to Noah. "Stay close to Ethan." Ethan appeared at the boy's side without being asked. They moved inside through the front door, which swung open easily on broken hinges. Flashlight beams crossed through dusty rooms, broken furniture, scattered trash, bare floors covered in grit, and old leaves that had blown in through gaps in the boards. Empty. Marcus moved methodically, checking each room without rushing. His light swept across walls, corners, doorways. Nothing. Then he reached the far end of the hallway. The wall there did not look right. There was a section near the baseboards where the drywall was cracked and buckled outward, not from age, but from something pressing against it from the other side. A faint outline ran along the edge, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Marcus pressed his hand flat against it. The wall shifted. He pushed harder, and it swung inward on a hidden hinge, revealing a dark staircase dropping sharply downward. A rush of warm, stale air came up from below, and with it came sound. The distant, low hum of machinery, metal shifting against metal, and somewhere underneath all of it, the muffled sounds of children's voices. Noah made a sound behind him that was not quite a word. Marcus looked back at his brothers. 15 faces looked back at him through the dark. He turned and started down the stairs. The stairs were steep and narrow. Marcus kept one hand on the rough wall beside him as he descended. The wood creaked under his boots. Behind him, his brothers followed in single file, each one moving as carefully as the last. The warm air pressed up against them, heavy with the smell of motor oil and metal shavings, and something else underneath it all. Something stale and closed in, like a space that had not seen fresh air in a very long time. The bottom of the stairs opened up and Marcus stopped. He swept his flashlight across the space in front of him. It was enormous. The basement stretched far beyond what the house above suggested was possible. The ceiling was low, supported by thick wooden beams. Bare bulbs hung from wires strung between them, casting a pale yellow light across everything below. Workbenches lined the walls, covered in tools and engine parts and stripped components from vehicles, car doors stacked against one wall, tires piled in towers, hoods and bumpers and door panels arranged in rows like some kind of grotesque inventory. In the center of the floor sat the gutted shells of 3 vehicles. One was missing its entire front end. Another had been lifted onto jacks with its undercarriage exposed. The third had no doors at all, and its seats had been pulled out and stacked to one side. It was a chop shop. A big one. Marcus had seen things like this before, but never hidden beneath a house, never running this deep underground, and never with children doing the work. There were 7 of them scattered across the basement. All young. Some no older than 10 or 11. They wore dirty clothes and had grease on their hands and faces. One boy was lying underneath one of the vehicles, passing a wrench up to a heavy-set man standing over him. A girl near the back wall was pulling apart a dashboard with her small hands, guided by a man who pointed at different pieces without looking at her. 2 other adults stood near the far wall. When the flashlight beams swept across them, both men froze. One reached toward his belt. "Don't." Marcus's voice was flat and quiet, the kind of quiet that did not need volume to carry weight. The man went still. Around Marcus, his brothers spread out across the basement without a word. The other adults were cornered quickly. No one was hurt. No one ran. The size of the group alone was enough to make sure of that. The children reacted differently. Several of them flinched away from the light. One small boy pressed himself against the wall and pulled his knees up to his chest. A girl near the workbench started to cry silently, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her face. "Hey." Marcus crouched down near the boy against the wall. He kept his voice low and steady. "Nobody here is going to hurt you. I promise you that." The boy stared at him with wide eyes, but did not run. Marcus straightened and turned to scan the room. Noah was already moving. He was pushing past workbenches and ducking around the vehicle shells, calling Lily's name in a voice that broke open the silence of the room like something desperate and raw. "Lily! Lily, it's me. It's Noah. Where are you?" Then Marcus saw it. Along the far wall, partly hidden behind a stack of stripped car doors, was a heavy wooden door with a padlock on the outside. His jaw tightened. He crossed the room in long strides and grabbed the padlock. It was solid, but the hinge plate holding it to the door frame was old, and the screws had begun to pull loose from the soft wood around them. He gripped the plate with both hands and wrenched it free with one hard pull. The door swung open. Inside was a small storage room barely larger than a closet. A single bare bulb flickered overhead. On the floor, wrapped in an oversized jacket that wasn't hers, sat a girl with dark, tangled hair and bruised hands and eyes that were still sharp despite everything they had seen. Lily. Noah crashed to his knees in front of her. He pulled her into his arms and held on like he was afraid she might disappear again, if he let go. His shoulders shook. He pressed his face against the top of her head and said her name over and over, quietly, the way you say something you thought you might never get to say again. Lily wrapped her arms around him. She did not cry right away. She just held him tight and said 3 words into his shoulder. "I knew you'd come." Marcus stood in the doorway and let them have that moment. Behind him, his brothers were already moving the children toward the stairs, speaking gently, guiding them with patience and care. Ethan had his jacket off and had wrapped it around the small boy who had been pressed against the wall. Another one of the brothers was carrying a girl who was too exhausted to walk on her own. Marcus turned to Ethan. "Get all of them out, every single one. Stay with them until help arrives." Ethan gave a firm nod and turned back toward the stairs. Marcus stayed where he was. He looked around the basement slowly. The workbenches, the tools, the organized rows of stolen parts. This was not something thrown together quickly. It had been running for a long time. Someone had planned this carefully. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly how to keep it hidden. Marcus needed to understand who. The night air hit them like a wave when they came up the stairs. Cold and clean and full of the smell of pine trees and open sky. After the weight of that basement, it felt like surfacing from deep water. Marcus stood on the porch of the abandoned house and watched his brothers move with quiet purpose. Some had already pulled blankets and extra gear from the saddlebags on their bikes. Others were breaking out the food and water they had packed for the road. Within minutes, the old house had been transformed into something warmer than it had any right to be. The children sat in small clusters on the floor of the main room. Some were wrapped in leather jackets that hung past their knees. Others clutched bottles of water with both hands like they were afraid someone might take them back. A few of the older kids sat very still, staring at nothing, their eyes carrying the particular emptiness that comes from being afraid for too long. Marcus watched one of his brothers, a big, quiet man named Russ, carefully tear open a pack of crackers and hold them out to a small girl with a torn sleeve. She stared at his hand for a moment. Then she took one cracker, then another. Russ just waited patiently, not pushing, not talking, just being there. That was enough. Noah sat on the floor near the front window with Lily beside him. She had the oversized jacket still wrapped around her shoulders. She was eating slowly, her eyes moving around the room, watching everything. She looked tired all the way down to her bones. But she was watching, taking it all in. That sharpness in her eyes had not gone anywhere. Marcus brought 2 more blankets over and set them down without making a fuss about it. "Thank you," Noah said quietly. His voice was still rough. Marcus gave him a single nod and crouched down beside them. "You doing okay?" Noah let out a breath that was not quite a laugh. "I don't know yet." "That's a fair answer." Marcus looked at Lily. "How about you?" She looked back at him evenly. "I'm okay," she said. Then, after a pause, "I knew someone would come." "Your brother didn't stop looking?" Marcus said. Something moved across her face, something soft and certain. "I know." Sirens sounded in the distance, still far off, but getting closer. Marcus stood. He told Ethan to stay with the children and keep everyone calm when the authorities arrived. Ethan was already nodding before Marcus finished the sentence. Marcus went back into the basement alone. He moved slowly this time. No urgency, no rescue driving his steps. He just walked the space with his flashlight and let himself see it properly. He was not sure what he was looking for at first. He stopped near one of the workbenches along the far wall. Something small caught the edge of his light. He leaned in closer. Scratched into the wood just below the surface of the bench, barely visible unless you were right on top of it, were two initials. LC. He stared at them for a moment. Then he moved to the next bench. There it was again. The same two initials, scratched in the same small, careful hand, this time on the underside of a shelf. Marcus began moving through the room with different eyes. Near the door to the storage room where Lily had been kept, a thin piece of green thread was looped around a nail in the doorframe. Easy to miss. The kind of thing your eyes would slide right past unless you were looking for it. He found a small drawing tucked beneath one of the gutted car seats, rough lines drawn on a scrap of torn paper, a stick figure near a door, an arrow pointing down. His chest tightened. She had been leaving a trail. Not randomly, deliberately, every mark, every thread, every small drawing placed where someone searching the room would eventually find them. Lily had not simply survived in that basement. She had been fighting her way out of it the whole time. Marcus carried the small drawing upstairs in his hand. The sirens were close now. Red and blue light flickered through the cracked windows of the old house, painting long stripes across the walls and floor. He could hear car doors opening outside and the low crackle of police radios cutting through the night air. Detective Laura Bennett was the first one through the door. She was sharp-eyed and moved with the kind of steady calm that comes from years of walking into hard situations. She took in the room fast, the children wrapped in leather jackets, the big bikers sitting quietly on the floor beside them. Ethan handing a water bottle to a young boy who looked about 8 years old. Her gaze found Marcus. She did not look relieved to see him, but she did not look hostile either. Just careful. "Marcus Cole," she said. It was not quite a question. "Detective?" He held out the small drawing. "You're going to want to see what's downstairs?" She looked at the paper in his hand. Then she looked at him. "Walk me through it." They went down together while other officers fanned through the house above them. Marcus moved his flashlight across the room, showing her each mark, each piece of thread, each scratched initial. Bennett crouched beside the workbench and studied the letters without touching them. She pulled out a small flashlight of her own and swept it slowly along the underside of the shelf. "A child did this," she said. It was not a question either. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. She was systematic about it. She knew what she was doing, Marcus said. Bennett stood and looked around the basement with the same careful eyes she had brought into every corner of the room. Then she nodded once, slowly, like she was making a decision about something. "I need to speak with her." They brought Lily into a quieter corner of the main room upstairs. Bennett sat down on the floor so she was at the same level as Lily, which Marcus noticed and respected. Noah stayed close. Lily still had the oversized jacket around her shoulders, and she looked at the detective with those same steady eyes that did not miss anything. "Can you tell me about the marks you left?" Bennett asked. Her voice was calm. Easy. No pressure behind it. Lily glanced at Marcus once, then back to the detective. "I watched them," she said simply. "The men running things. I watched how they moved around, where they went, which doors they used, when they were paying attention and when they weren't." "You watched them while you were working?" "While I was working. While I was waiting. All the time." Lily pulled the jacket a little tighter. "I figured if I just sat there and did what they said, nothing would change. So I started watching instead." Noah was very still beside her. "I didn't have anything to write with at first," Lily continued, "but I found a piece of wire near one of the workbenches. It was small enough to hide in my sleeve." She looked down at her hands. "I started with the initials because they were fast. If someone came over, I could stop, and it didn't look like anything." "The thread," Bennett said. "Where did you get it?" "My jacket had a torn lining. I pulled pieces out a little at a time." Lily almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "I put them near the doors because I thought if someone was searching, they would check the doors." Marcus looked at the torn paper drawing still in Bennett's hand. "And the drawing?" Lily looked at it. "That one was for Noah." Her voice was softer now. "I didn't know if he'd be the one to find it, but I wanted him to understand I knew he was looking." She turned her eyes to her brother. "I knew you would never stop." Noah's jaw tightened. He pressed his lips together hard and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "You said you believed someone would come," Marcus said gently. "How long did you hold on to that?" "Every day," Lily said. "Even the hard ones." Bennett wrote something in her notebook. Then she looked up. "Lily, do you know the name of the person who was in charge of the operation? The one giving the orders?" Lily did not hesitate. "Daniel Reeves," she said. The name landed in Marcus's chest like a stone dropping into still water. He went very quiet inside. Daniel Reeves. The face came back before he could stop it. Younger, laughing, standing over him in the rain on a roadside that felt like a lifetime ago, pressing a hand against a wound Marcus had been sure was going to be the last thing he ever felt. "You're not done yet," Daniel had told him that night. "You hear me? Not done." Marcus stared at the far wall of the room and said nothing. Daniel Reeves, the man who had saved his life. The sun came up slow. It pushed through the tree line in long, pale strips, catching the dew on the grass and turning it silver. The old house looked different in the daylight, smaller somehow, less like a place full of shadows, and more like a place that had simply been forgotten. Marcus sat on the front steps with a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He had not slept. He was not sure he wanted to. Behind him, officers moved in and out of the house in a steady, quiet rhythm. Cameras flashed somewhere below ground. Voices traded careful words in the way investigators do when they are building something piece by piece. Laura Bennett had been at it since before sunrise, moving through every room with the same focused calm she had carried in the night before. Marcus stared at the trees. His brothers had not gone far. Most of them were parked along the gravel shoulder of the road about 100 yards back, waiting in the way that only people who have known each other a long time can wait. No phones, no noise, just there. Ethan had walked over once around 5 in the morning, set a fresh coffee cup beside Marcus without a word, and walked back. That was enough. Marcus turned the cold cup in his hands and thought about Daniel Reeves. Not the man he had learned about last night. Not the one behind the false wall, and the stolen cars and the frightened children. He thought about the other one. The one that came before all of that. Daniel had been 22 when they first crossed paths. Loud, restless, always with something to prove but not mean. Never mean back then. He had this way of laughing that came from his whole body, like whatever was funny was the funniest thing that had ever happened in the history of the world. Marcus used to give him a hard time about it. Daniel never cared. They were both young and stupid in different ways. Marcus was the kind of stupid that got him into trouble with the wrong people on a cold night on a back road outside of town. He remembered the headlights, the gravel under his back, the feeling in his side that was hot, and then suddenly very cold. Daniel had found him. He had pressed both hands down hard and told Marcus to stay with him. Over and over, his voice had been steady the whole time, which later struck Marcus as remarkable because Daniel was not a steady person. He was all movement and noise. But that night he had been a rock. "You're not done yet, you hear me? Not done." Marcus had believed him. He had lived. They rode together for a few years after that. Then Daniel's wife passed. It happened fast, the way those things sometimes do. 1 month she was fine and the next she was gone, and Daniel was a different person standing in the same body. He got quiet. Then he got distant. Then one day he was simply not there anymore. Marcus had looked for him, not as hard as he should have. That thought had been sitting in his chest since the moment Lily said the name, and he could not move it no matter how many times he tried. He had looked, and then he had stopped looking. The screen door behind him opened, boots on the steps. Bennett came around and stood beside him, looking out at the same tree line. She had a folder tucked under one arm and dark circles under her eyes that matched his own. "We confirmed it," she said. Marcus did not turn his head. "Records found on site. Financial trail. Witness accounts from 3 of the children who were willing to talk this morning." She paused. "Daniel Reeves organized the whole thing. Has been running it for at least 4 years." 4 years? Marcus set the cold coffee cup down on the step beside his boot. 4 years of children being frightened in a basement while Daniel gave the orders. He sat with that for a moment. Then he sat with the fact that somewhere in those 4 years, he had simply stopped looking for his friend. The shelter was a converted church hall on the edge of town. Someone had hung paper stars along the windows. Yellow and blue ones, taped crookedly by hands that were probably trying to make the place feel less like what it was. The floor was old hardwood, worn smooth in the middle from years of folding chairs and Sunday potlucks. Rows of cots lined the walls, each one with a thin blanket folded at the foot. Sarah Mitchell met Marcus at the door. She was a small woman with steady eyes, and the kind of calm that did not come from having an easy life. It came from having survived a hard one. She shook his hand and did not flinch at the leather vest or the ink on his arms, which he noticed and appreciated. "Most of them are still sleeping," she said quietly. "A few of the older ones wouldn't settle. They kept asking if someone was going to come take them back." Marcus nodded. "What did you tell them?" "That they were safe here." She glanced toward the back of the hall. "Noah is awake, has been for a while. He won't sleep." She pointed him toward a side door that opened onto a narrow outdoor step. A strip of cracked concrete overlooked a small yard where the grass grew too long and a rusted basketball hoop stood without a net. Noah was sitting on the step with his knees pulled up to his chest and his arms wrapped around them. He was still wearing the same shirt from the night before, His shoulders were hunched in that particular way people hold themselves when they are trying to take up as little space as possible. Marcus came and sat down beside him. Not too close. Just near enough. Neither of them said anything for a moment. A bird called somewhere in the overgrown yard. The morning air was warm and thick and smelled like cut grass and distant rain. "How is Lily?" Marcus asked. "Sleeping." Noah's voice was flat. "Sarah said she finally went out about an hour ago." "That is good." Noah stared at the broken concrete between his feet. "She kept waking up. Every time she closed her eyes, she woke back up again. I had to sit with her and hold her hand until she stopped shaking." "You did right." "I should have found her faster." The words came out like he had been holding them for a long time, and they finally got too heavy to carry. "She was down there for 3 days, Marcus. 3 days. I didn't know where she was. I couldn't help her. I just ran around in the dark until I found a bunch of strangers." His voice cracked on the last word. Marcus looked at the side of the boy's face. The bruise under his eye had deepened overnight into a dark purple. There was dried mud still on his collar. "You ran in the dark until you found help," Marcus said. "That is not the same as failing." "It feels the same. I know it does." Noah turned his head and looked at him for the first time. His eyes were red and swollen and full of something that was too old for 17. "She left little clues, you know," he said, "like she actually trusted I was going to find her, like she just knew." His voice broke again. "What if I hadn't? What if I never found those bikers and she just sat there thinking I was coming and I never came?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "She knew you," he said simply. "And she was right." Noah shook his head and looked back down at the concrete. Marcus leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. He looked out at the long grass and the lopsided basketball hoop and spoke in a voice that was even and sure. "Listen to me. Whatever happens next, however long this takes, you and Lily are not alone anymore." He paused, letting the words settle. "None of those kids in there are alone anymore. That is a promise." Noah did not answer, but he stopped shaking. The next morning came in quiet and gray. Marcus pulled his bike into the shelter lot just after 8. Ethan rode in beside him, and then the others came one by one, their engines cutting off until the only sound left was the soft tick of cooling metal and the birds in the trees overhead. 16 motorcycles. 16 men in leather vests with patched-up shoulders and weathered faces and big hands that knew how to fix broken things. They stood in the gravel lot, and nobody said much. That was fine. They had never needed a lot of words between them. Sarah met them at the door again. She had dark circles under her eyes and a coffee cup in her hand that looked like it had been refilled several times already, but she held the door open wide and stepped aside without hesitating. "They are starting to wake up," she said. "Fair warning, a few of them saw you all pull in. Some of them got scared." Marcus nodded slowly. He understood that. He did not take it personally. Inside, the hall felt different in the morning light. The paper stars along the windows caught the gray glow coming through the glass and threw faint shapes across the floor. A few of the younger children were sitting up on their cots, clutching their blankets. Their eyes moved fast, checking every corner, every face, every door. Marcus had seen that kind of watching before. It was the look of kids who had learned that adults could not be trusted, not because the kids were broken, but because the adults in their lives had given them every reason to be afraid. He kept his distance. He moved slowly. He did not stand over anyone, or raise his voice, or try to get anyone to talk. Ethan understood the same thing without being told. He found a spot near the wall and sat down on the floor, cross-legged, like he had all the time in the world. A small boy about 7 years old watched him from a cot across the room for a long time. Eventually, the boy slid off his cot and walked over and sat down about 2 feet away, still holding his blanket. Ethan did not say a word. He just nodded. The boy nodded back. Marcus watched that and felt something loosen in his chest. One of the older girls, maybe 12 or 13, sat alone near the side window. She had her knees pulled up and her forehead pressed against the glass. She was not crying. She was just staring out at the overgrown yard like she was trying to find something familiar in it. Sarah came and stood beside Marcus and spoke in a low voice. "That is Maya," she said. "She has been here before. Different situation, different shelter. But this is not her first time." She paused. "We have been trying to find a family member or a guardian to contact." "And?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "There is nobody." The words landed heavy. Marcus looked around the room slowly. Some of the children had people coming. Scared parents who had been searching. Relatives who had been making phone calls. He had already heard 2 reunions that morning before he even walked inside. Voices in the parking lot going high and tight with relief. But not all of them. Not even close. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. "A few of the children who were brought in last night," she said carefully. "We have made a lot of calls. There is no one searching for them." Her voice stayed steady, but just barely. "Some of them have been missing for weeks. Nobody filed a report." Marcus stood still. He thought about what that meant. Not in a big, abstract way, in a very simple, very specific way. A child trapped underground in the dark, waiting for someone to come. And on the outside, not a single person noticed they were gone. He turned to Ethan, who had heard every word, and was already looking at him. Ethan gave a small nod. Marcus looked back at Sarah. "Tell me what they need," he said. The days that followed were not dramatic. There were no big speeches, no grand gestures, just men showing up every morning and finding quiet ways to make themselves useful. Ethan brought tools one afternoon and set up a small table in the side yard. He showed a couple of the older boys how to fix a bicycle chain. Nothing fancy, just grease and patience and steady hands. The boys stood close, watching every move, and by the end of the hour they were asking questions without being prompted. 2 of Marcus's brothers, a big quiet man named Ricky, and a wiry older guy everyone called Truck, took turns reading to the younger children in the evenings. Neither of them was great at it. They stumbled over words sometimes and held the books too close to their faces. But the kids laughed when that happened. And laughter, even small laughter, was something. Maya, the girl from the window, did not warm up quickly. But she started sitting a little closer each day. Not talking, just closer. Like she was testing how much space she was allowed to take up. Marcus watched all of it from the edges. He helped Sarah with supply runs. He fixed a broken hinge on the back door that had been squeaking for what looked like months. He sat at tables and shared meals, and did not push anyone to say anything they were not ready to say. Lily spent most of her time near Noah, which was how it should have been. She was talking more. Small things at first. What food she liked, a drawing she made, a question about when she could go outside. Each small thing was progress, and Sarah made sure everyone around her treated it that way. But Noah was different. Noah smiled for Lily. He sat with her, joked with her, brought her extra juice boxes from the kitchen like it was the most important job in the world. But when Lily was busy or sleeping, Noah got quiet in a way that had nothing peaceful about it. Marcus noticed. On the 4th afternoon, Marcus found Noah sitting alone on the shelter steps outside. The boy had his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the ground. His jaw was tight. His shoulders were curled inward like he was trying to fold himself smaller. Marcus sat down beside him without saying anything at first. The yard was still. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower hummed. After a while, Noah spoke without looking up. "I keep thinking about how long she was down there," he said. His voice was low, rough at the edges. "Weeks. She was in that basement for weeks, and I had no idea." He pulled in a slow breath. "I live with her. I am supposed to look out for her, and I had no idea." Marcus did not rush to fill the silence. Noah's hands pressed together between his knees. "If I had paid more attention, if I had pushed harder when people told me to stop asking questions." He shook his head. "Every day I didn't find her, she was down there leaving little scratches on walls, hoping someone would come." His voice cracked on the last word. "That is on me," he said. "All of it." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked back out at the yard. "I was 15, Marcus said. Living out of a backpack, no family I could call, no one checking if I ate." He said it simply, like he was reading from an old list. "There was a period of about 3 months where I made every wrong choice a person could make. Not because I was bad, because I was scared and I was alone and I did not know how to ask for help." Noah looked up slowly. "A man I barely knew pulled me out of that," Marcus continued. "Fed me, pointed me somewhere better. I did not want to accept it at first." He paused. "I thought needing help meant I had failed." He turned and looked directly at Noah. "It did not mean that then," he said, "and it does not mean that now." Detective Laura Bennett arrived on a Tuesday morning. She pulled up to the shelter in an unmarked car. Plain gray, nothing on it to say what it was. She had a leather folder tucked under one arm and a paper coffee cup in the other hand. She wore a dark blazer over a simple shirt and moved like someone who had done this kind of work long enough to stop being surprised by most things. Marcus was in the side yard when she came through the gate. He had been helping Ethan carry a donated bookshelf through the narrow back entrance, and he set his end down when he saw her badge. She introduced herself without making it formal, just her name and her unit. Her eyes moved around the yard the way a person's eyes do when they are building a picture in their head. "You are Marcus Cole," she said. Not a question. "That is right," he said. She looked at him the way people sometimes did, taking in the leather cut, the worn boots, the size of him. He was used to it. He waited. Whatever she was measuring, she seemed to finish quickly. "Can we talk somewhere quiet?" They sat at a picnic table near the far fence. Ethan drifted back inside without being asked. The yard was mostly empty. A couple of the younger kids were playing with a ball near the shelter door, far enough away that their voices were just soft noise in the background. Laura opened her folder and set it flat on the table without turning it toward him. "Daniel Reeves is gone," she said. "He was not at the property when we went back. We have been tracking him for several days, and he has not surfaced anywhere we expected." Marcus kept his face still. "He planned this," she continued. "The basement operation was organized in a way that took time and careful thinking. When it came apart, he moved fast. Too fast to be improvising." She tapped the edge of the folder lightly with 2 fingers. "He cleared out before we could get to him for questioning, and the records that should have been there were gone too." "The children's records," Marcus said. "Names, dates, how long each child was held, what they were made to do." She nodded. "All of it. Gone." Marcus looked down at the table for a moment. The wood was old and soft in places, worn smooth by weather and time. He pressed one hand flat against it. "Without those records," he said slowly. "It becomes harder," she said. "Not impossible, but harder." Some of the children can speak for themselves. Some of them cannot or will not yet. And without documentation connecting everything to Reeves directly, building a complete case takes longer. She paused, and some of the children may not receive the recognition they deserve. Marcus said nothing. Laura studied him. You knew him. A long time ago, Marcus said. How well? He looked up. Well enough that this is not easy to sit with. She accepted that without pressing further. She pulled a small photograph from inside the folder and slid it toward him. It was a shot taken from security footage, grainy and dark, but recognizable. A man moving fast through a parking lot, head down, bag over one shoulder. Daniel. Marcus looked at the photograph for a long moment. He recognized the walk. The way Daniel always leaned slightly forward when he moved, like he was heading into a wind that nobody else could feel. He left something behind, Laura said. She hesitated, then pulled out a folded piece of paper in a clear evidence sleeve and placed it beside the photograph. Marcus looked at her. It was addressed to you, she said quietly. He did not touch it. He read it through the plastic. The handwriting was tight and slanted. The message was short. You always thought you knew who I was. You never did. You never will. Do not waste your mercy on a version of me that stopped existing a long time ago. Marcus sat with those words for a long time without moving. Daniel was not just running from the law. He was running from himself. Marcus found him 3 days later. It was not through any official channel. It was through memory. He thought back to a conversation he and Daniel had shared nearly 20 years ago, sitting on the hood of a broken-down truck outside the city, talking about the kinds of places a person could disappear into, if they ever needed to. Daniel had laughed when he said it. Marcus had not forgotten. The garage sat at the dead end of a gravel road on the edge of town. It was the kind of building that had given up on itself slowly over a long stretch of years. The roof sagged on one side. The paint had peeled so completely that the bare wood underneath had gone gray and soft. A rusted metal sign above the door hung at an angle, the words on it long faded to nothing. Marcus parked his bike at the edge of the road and walked in. He did not bring anyone with him. He told Ethan where he was going, and Ethan had not liked that one bit. But Marcus needed this to be quiet. He needed it to be honest. The side door was unlocked. It swung inward with a long, low creak. Inside, the air was thick with old oil and dust. Weak afternoon light pushed through 2 dirty windows, falling in pale strips across a concrete floor cracked like dry riverbed. A workbench ran along the far wall, empty except for a rusted wrench and a folded cloth. Daniel was sitting on an overturned crate in the corner. He looked smaller than Marcus remembered. Older. His hair had gone mostly gray, and the lines in his face were deep, carved there by years of something heavier than just time. He held a paper cup loosely in both hands, and when he looked up, his eyes were calm, like he had already been expecting this. I figured it would be you, Daniel said. Marcus pulled a second crate over and sat down across from him. He did not say anything right away. He let the quiet settle between them the way it used to when they were young men, and the world felt like it was full of space. You got my letter, Daniel said. I did. Daniel looked down at his cup. I meant what I said. I know you did. Marcus leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. I did not come here to argue with it. Daniel's eyes came back up slowly. I came because you deserve to say your piece, Marcus said, and because I owe you that much. Something moved across Daniel's face. Not gratitude exactly, more like a man who had braced for a punch that did not come. He was quiet for a moment. Then he started to talk. He talked about the years after they had gone separate ways. He talked about losing the woman he loved and how the grief of it had been so enormous that it had hollowed him out from the inside. He talked about how he had tried to build something afterward, something that felt like purpose, a way to give broken people a skill and a start. He said the idea had been real. That part of it had been true. But I was angry, he said, all the time, underneath everything. And when people did not do what I needed them to do, when they left or pushed back or let me down, I stopped being patient. He turned the paper cup slowly in his hands. I started controlling things, because controlling things felt safer than trusting them. His voice did not break, but it went very quiet. I told myself I was giving those kids something useful, he said. I kept telling myself that even when I knew it was not true anymore. He set the cup down on the floor beside the crate. I became exactly what I used to be afraid of, and I knew it. I just could not stop. Marcus sat with that. He thought about the letter, about the children in the basement, about Lily's small hands and the thread she had left tied near the door because she was not willing to give up. He thought about the man Daniel had once been. You need to turn yourself in, Marcus said. Daniel nodded slowly, like he had already known it would come to this. Like maybe in some part of himself he had not wanted to admit to, he had been waiting for someone to say it plainly. Marcus stood. He looked at his old friend for a long moment. He did not excuse what Daniel had done. He could not. The children deserved better than that. But as he turned and walked toward the door, the gray light falling soft around him, he carried with him the knowledge that the person sitting on that crate was not only the man who had run a cruel operation in a dark basement, he was also the person who had once pulled a young Marcus Cole out of a very bad situation and asked for nothing in return. Both things were true. Marcus walked out into the open air. The shelter smelled like coffee and warm bread. It was a simple building, a converted community center on the edge of town with wide windows and scuffed floors and a long row of coat hooks by the front door. Sarah Mitchell had filled every corner of it with small, careful things. Mismatched chairs pulled together in circles, a bookshelf packed with paperbacks and board games, a table in the kitchen where someone had left a half-finished puzzle of a mountain lake. It felt nothing like the basement. That was the point. Marcus came through the front door and stood still for a moment, letting the warmth settle over him. The weight of that gray garage was still sitting somewhere in his chest. He did not try to shake it off. He just breathed through it, slow and steady, the way he had learned to do with things that needed time. Sarah looked up from the kitchen doorway and met his eyes. She did not ask him how it went. She could read the answer in the set of his shoulders. "They're out back," she said simply. He nodded and went through. The back lot was a wide square of cracked pavement with a rusted basketball hoop at one end and a pair of wooden benches along the fence. Ethan was out there with 3 of the younger boys, crouched beside an old bicycle with a broken chain. He had a rag tucked into his back pocket and grease on both hands, and he was explaining something slowly and carefully while one of the boys watched with his chin nearly resting on Ethan's shoulder. Marcus leaned against the door frame and watched. Ethan had a way with kids that most people would not have guessed from looking at him. He did not talk down to them. He just talked, straight and simple and patient, like whatever they were curious about was the most reasonable thing in the world to be curious about. 2 of the other Hell's Angels were at the far bench, sharing a bag of chips with a pair of girls who were laughing about something. Real laughter. The easy kind that does not need a reason. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. He spent most of that afternoon with the children. He helped Ethan finish the bicycle repair, letting one of the boys hand him tools and explaining what each one did. He sat with a quiet boy named Tommy, who did not talk much but liked to draw, and he asked about the drawing, and Tommy showed him without being asked twice. He ate dinner at the long table with everyone crowded together, elbows bumping, voices overlapping, somebody always reaching across somebody else for the salt. It was loud and messy and full. After dinner, while the others were helping clear the table, Marcus stepped out to the back lot alone. The sky had gone deep blue and the first stars were coming through. He sat on one of the wooden benches and let the quiet come back to him. He heard the door behind him open. Lily sat down beside him. She had her knees pulled up to her chest and her arms wrapped around them. She looked out at the darkening sky for a little while without saying anything. That was something Marcus had noticed about her. She never rushed into words. She always seemed to choose them. "Marcus," she said. "Yeah." She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "There are other kids who are scared. Like I was." She pressed her lips together. "Not just scared of being somewhere bad. Scared to tell anyone. Scared nobody will believe them." Marcus looked at her. "I want to help them," she said. Her voice was steady, certain, like she had been thinking about this for a long time and had finally decided it was ready to be said out loud. "I don't know how yet, but I want to be somebody they can talk to. Somebody who already knows what it feels like." She turned and looked at him then. Her eyes were clear. "Because somebody believed me," she said, "and it changed everything." The news spread the way small-town news always does. Not all at once, in pieces, a conversation at the diner, a comment at the gas station. A whisper passed between two people waiting in line at the grocery store. By the time the story reached most people, it had already changed shape several times. Some of what was said was true. Children had been trapped in a basement. They had been rescued. A man had been arrested. But the other parts, the parts that got louder as the days passed, those were something else entirely. Those bikers had no business being there. What were the Hells Angels doing involved in all this? How do we know they weren't part of it? Who gave them the right to go charging into that house? Marcus heard it first from Ethan, who had stopped at the hardware store for supplies and come back quiet in a way that meant something was wrong. Ethan set a brown paper bag on the workbench and crossed his arms and looked at the floor for a moment before he spoke. "People are talking," Ethan said. "What kind of talking?" "The kind that twists things." Ethan looked up. "There's folks saying we made the situation worse, that we should have called the police and stood back, that we were reckless." He paused. "One guy at the counter was saying maybe we already knew about the place." Marcus did not respond right away. He picked up a wrench from the bench and turned it slowly in his hands. The metal was cool and heavy and solid, and he held on to that feeling while he let the words settle. He was not surprised. Not exactly. This was not the first time people had looked at the leather vests and the loud bikes and decided the rest of the story before they heard it. He had spent most of his adult life being the kind of person that certain folks crossed the street to avoid. But it still stung, because this time, the story mattered more than just his own reputation. The shelter stayed quiet for the most part over the next couple of days. Sarah was careful about what she let in. She kept the children away from the noise as much as she could. The older ones could feel it anyway, the way kids always can. That invisible tension that adults try to hide, but never quite manage to. Noah felt it more than anyone. He had been doing a little better. Not all the way better, but better. He had been sleeping, eating, spending time with Lily. He had even laughed once at something Ethan said, A real laugh, short and surprised, like it caught him off guard. But then he started hearing things too. He overheard two people talking outside the shelter one evening, their voices carrying through an open window without them knowing. A neighbor and someone Marcus did not recognize. They were not being cruel exactly. They were just being careless, the way people sometimes are when they think no one who matters is listening. I just wonder if that boy should have handled it differently. Going to a bunch of bikers in the middle of the night. Anything could have happened. Caused a whole mess is what it did. Noah came to find Marcus after that. He walked out to the back lot where Marcus was sitting alone, and he stood a few feet away, with his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. His jaw was tight. His eyes were red around the edges. Marcus looked at him and waited. Noah stared at the cracked pavement for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "I shouldn't have done it," he said. Marcus kept still. "I shouldn't have run to you. I should have figured something else out." Noah's voice cracked at the edges. "Everyone would have been better off if I'd just stayed quiet. If I hadn't dragged all of you into this." He looked up and his eyes were full. "I wish I'd never asked for help." Marcus sat with Noah for a long time after that. He did not rush the boy. He did not hand him a list of reasons why he was wrong. He just let the silence do what silence sometimes needs to do, which is hold a person long enough for them to catch their breath. Eventually, he said, "You know what I see when I look at you?" Noah shook his head without looking up. "I see a kid who ran toward the most frightening thing he had ever faced, in the middle of the night, with nothing but desperation and love for his sister." Marcus leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. "That is not something to be ashamed of. That is something most grown men could not do." Noah did not answer, but his shoulders dropped just a little. The tight coil of guilt in his chest did not disappear, but it loosened enough for him to breathe. They sat out there until the sky turned from dark blue to the pale gray color that comes just before morning. That was the last quiet night for a while. 1 week after the rescue, Detective Laura Bennett drove to the shelter with her face set in a careful, practiced calm that Marcus had already learned meant bad news. He met her outside. The morning air was cool and sharp and smelled like damp earth. She got straight to it. "The records are gone," she said. "The documentation we expected to find from the operation. Lists of names, dates, transactions, evidence connecting the full scope of what Reeves was running." She crossed her arms. "It was not in the location we were told to look. The room was cleared out." Marcus felt the words land like something heavy dropping from a height. "How?" he said. It was not really a question. "Someone moved them before we could secure the scene. We do not know if it was Reeves himself or someone working for him." Laura's voice was steady, but her eyes were tired. "Without those records, we can speak to what happened to the children we found. But the wider operation, the other children involved over the years, the adults who were paid to keep quiet, we cannot prove any of that without documentation." Marcus turned away for a moment and looked out at the empty street. A bird was sitting on a fence post down the way, perfectly still, like it was thinking something over. "Those kids deserve better than this," he said quietly. "I know," Laura said. "That is why I am telling you. Not because I think you can fix it, but because you were there. If there is anything you saw or heard that pointed to where he kept records, anything at all, I need you to think hard about it." Marcus nodded. He told her he would. That evening, Marcus gathered Noah and Lily in the small sitting room at the shelter. Sarah sat nearby, quiet and steady as always, her hands folded in her lap. He explained it carefully. Simply. He did not dress it up or soften it so much that it lost its meaning. The records that could protect the other children were missing. Without them, those kids might not get the justice they deserved. Noah's expression went dark and tight. Lily was very still. She had been sitting cross-legged on the old armchair in the corner, a blanket pulled up around her. She had not said much since Marcus started talking. But her eyes had been moving, the way they did when she was turning something over in her mind. Then she looked up. "He had a notebook," she said. Her voice was small but certain. A brown one. He kept it in his office downstairs. And there were photographs, too, in a frame on the shelf behind his desk. She pressed her lips together, thinking. He never let anyone touch that shelf. He got angry once when one of the other kids went near it. She looked at Marcus. He kept the frame turned toward the wall, like he did not want anyone to see what was in it. The abandoned house looked smaller in the daylight. That surprised Marcus somehow. At night, the place had felt like something out of a bad dream. Dark windows staring out like hollow eyes. The trees pressing in close on all sides. Now, in the pale morning light, it was just an old building with a sagging porch and peeling paint and weeds growing up through the cracks in the front steps. But he noticed Lily slow her walk the moment they turned up the dirt path toward the front door. She did not stop. She kept moving. But her hand found Noah's arm and held on. Noah looked down at her and did not say anything. He just slowed his pace to match hers and stayed close. Laura Bennett and two of her investigators moved ahead of them, radios clipped to their jackets, talking in low voices about the layout of the building. Ethan and two other brothers from the chapter had come too, staying toward the back, quiet and solid the way they always were when something serious needed doing. Marcus fell back and walked beside Lily. "You do not have to go down," he said. "You can tell me exactly where it is, and I will find it." Lily shook her head. Slow but firm. "I remember every inch of that room," she said quietly. "You will look in the wrong place." Marcus nodded. He did not argue. They went inside. The house smelled like dust and old wood and something damp underneath it all. Sunlight came through in thin strips, where the boards on the windows had gaps. The floor creaked under their feet as they moved toward the back of the main room, toward the doorway that led down. At the top of the basement stairs, Lily stopped. She stood very still, staring down into the dim light below. Her breathing changed. Marcus could hear it, short and careful, like she was measuring each breath out. Noah stepped up beside her. "Hey," he said softly. Just that one word, but the way he said it held everything. "I am right here. I am not going anywhere. You are not alone." Lily exhaled slowly. She gripped the railing with one hand and started down the steps. The basement was colder than the rest of the house. The overhead lights had been restored by one of Laura's team, and the yellow glow they threw across the space made everything look raw and exposed. The long workbenches were still there, the old equipment, the faint smell of grease and metal that probably soaked into the walls so deep it would never fully leave. Lily walked through it like someone moving through water, each step deliberate, her eyes moving carefully across the space. Marcus watched her jaw tighten when she passed the door to the small storage room where she had been kept. She did not look at it directly, but her step faltered just slightly, and she pressed her lips together hard. "Take your time," Marcus said quietly. She nodded but did not answer. They moved toward the back where Daniel's office sat behind a heavy door. Laura had already photographed the space, but she stepped aside without a word to let Lily lead. The office was small, a battered desk, a bare bulb overhead. And there, on the shelf behind the desk, the frame that Lily had described. Still there, still turned toward the wall. Lily stood in the doorway and looked around the room slowly. Then she said, "He always touched it before he left, every single time, like he needed to remind himself it was still there." She pointed at the frame. Marcus stepped past the desk and lifted it carefully from the shelf. He turned it over. An old photograph, creased and worn, a group of young men standing beside motorcycles, grinning like they had not yet learned what the world could do to a person. Behind the frame, the wall was not flat. There was a seam in the wood. Thin. Easy to miss if you were not looking. Marcus pressed his fingers against it and pushed. A small compartment opened. Empty. Empty. Marcus stared at the dark space inside the wall for a long moment. His hand was still pressed flat against the edge of the small door. The wood felt rough and cold under his palm. He reached inside anyway. His fingers moved across the bottom of the compartment, across the back wall, across both sides. Nothing. Just bare wood and a thin layer of dust that had settled over something that used to be there. The shape of it was still visible. A faint rectangle pressed into the dust where something flat had sat for a long time. Papers, a folder maybe, something thin and organized and important. Gone. "He took it," Laura said from behind him. Her voice was calm, but tight. She was already looking at her phone, pulling up a message from someone on her team. Marcus stepped back from the wall. "When?" he asked. "Hard to say." Laura lowered her phone and looked at the compartment. "Could have been the night of the rescue. Could have been after. We did not get to seal this building fast enough." Marcus felt something heavy settle in his chest. Not anger exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that felt a lot like defeat. He had stood in this basement once already, and watched children walk out into the night air for the first time in too long. He had believed the hard part was done. He had believed Lily's clues had led them exactly where they needed to go. But Daniel had been one step ahead. Of course he had. Marcus turned and looked at Noah and Lily standing just inside the doorway. Noah had his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He was watching Marcus with the kind of careful look that meant he already understood something had gone wrong, but was waiting to hear how wrong. Lily was not looking at Marcus. She was looking at the compartment. Her head was tilted slightly to one side. Her eyes were moving slowly across the wall around the opening, the same quiet and focused way he had seen her look at things before, like she was reading something nobody else could see. "There is something off," she said. Her voice was soft, almost to herself. Marcus looked at her. "What do you mean?" She stepped forward and moved past him toward the wall. She crouched down in front of the open compartment and looked at the bottom edge of it. Then she reached out and pressed her palm flat against the wood panel just below the opening. It shifted, just barely. A small give, like a door that had not been latched properly. Lily looked up at Marcus. "The wood here is different," she said. "See the color? This piece is newer than the rest." Marcus crouched beside her. She was right. The panel below the compartment was just slightly lighter in color. Not something you would catch unless you were already paying close attention to the way the grain ran. He pressed his fingers along the edge of it and found the gap. Thin as a pencil line. He worked his fingertips into it and pulled slowly. The panel came loose. Behind it was a folded envelope, pressed flat against the back of the wall, wrapped once around with a piece of old electrical tape to hold it in place. The room went quiet. Marcus peeled the tape away carefully and unfolded the envelope. Inside was a thick fold of papers, handwritten pages, printed records, names and dates and locations stretching back years, just as Lily had described. Dozens of children. The full picture of what Daniel had built and how long it had been running. And tucked at the very front of the stack, a single handwritten note. Marcus read it slowly. It was not addressed to anyone. It was not signed with any kind of pride. It was short and written in a hand that shook a little, the letters uneven in places. I knew this day would come. I told myself I was building something. I was not. I know what I became. I am sorry to the ones I could not protect. I kept this because some part of me still believed it mattered that they were real. Marcus read it twice. Then he stood up slowly and held the papers out to Laura without a word. He looked at the note one more time before handing it over. The words sat in his mind in a way he could not shake loose. Some part of me still believed it mattered that they were real. He stood there in the cold of that basement, surrounded by the people who had come to find the truth, and he felt something he had not expected to feel. He was not sure Daniel was entirely gone. The next morning came gray and cold. Laura's team spread the recovered records across 3 folding tables inside the precinct conference room. The pages covered every inch of the surface, handwritten logs, printed manifests, dates going back almost 7 years. Marcus stood near the back wall with his arms crossed and watched them work. Ethan stood beside him, quiet for once, his big hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Nobody said much. The room did not need conversation. The papers said everything. A detective named Torres picked up one page and held it under the overhead light. He read it slowly. Then he set it down and picked up another. His jaw was tight. His eyes were careful and focused, but Marcus could see the weight of it landing on him the same way it had landed on everyone else. Name after name, child after child. Most of them had come from unstable homes. Some had been reported missing and forgotten about after a few weeks. Others had never been reported at all. Families too broken or too scared to push. Systems too stretched thin to look harder. Daniel had known exactly who to take. That was the part that sat the worst. Laura stood at the head of the table with a yellow legal pad, writing notes in her careful and steady hand. She had been there since before sunrise. Marcus had seen the light on in the building when he pulled up on his motorcycle in the early dark, and he had known she was already at work. She looked up from her pad and found his eyes across the room. "It holds up," she said. "Every name, every date, cross-referenced with missing persons records, with police reports, with school enrollment records. It is all real." She paused. They were all real. Noah was sitting in a chair near the door, with Lily beside him. Sarah Mitchell had driven them over that morning, believing they deserved to be in the room when the truth came out. Lily had the kind of stillness about her that Marcus had come to recognize. Not emptiness. Focus. When Laura spoke those last 4 words, Lily closed her eyes for just a moment. They were all real. Noah reached over and took his sister's hand without looking at her. She let him. Marcus watched them and felt something loosen in his chest. Something that had been pulled tight since the night Noah came stumbling out of the dark onto the highway. He could not name it exactly. It was not relief. It was bigger and quieter than relief. It was the feeling of a debt being paid. Not to him. To the children whose names were written on those pages. Laura's team spent the rest of the morning making calls. Families were contacted. Social workers were brought in. Each name on those records became a person who deserved to be found, to be believed, to be heard. The building outside the precinct was ordinary: gray walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of old coffee and paper. But something important happened inside it that morning, something that could not be undone. The children were believed. That mattered more than Marcus had words for. By afternoon, Daniel had been formally charged. The full count of charges stretched across 2 pages. Ethan read the list over Laura's shoulder and let out a slow breath through his nose but said nothing. Marcus asked one thing of Laura before he left. She looked at him for a long moment, reading his face the way she had learned to over the past weeks. Then she nodded. He drove alone to the county facility where Daniel was being held. The ride was quiet. The sky had cleared some, and the pale winter sun sat low over the trees along the highway. A guard brought Daniel to the visitation room. He looked smaller than Marcus remembered. Not physically. Something else had gone out of him. He sat down across the glass and looked at Marcus with tired eyes and said nothing. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he leaned forward. "You wrote that note because part of you still knew they were real," Marcus said. "That part of you was not gone. It was just buried under everything you let yourself become." Daniel looked down at the table. "Remembering who you were does not erase the harm you caused," Marcus said. His voice was steady. Not hard, not soft. Just honest. "But it means you still have a choice about who you become." Daniel did not respond right away. He kept his eyes on the table. His fingers were folded together in front of him, and Marcus noticed they were not steady. The man on the other side of that glass had organized a whole illegal operation for years. He had kept children afraid and obedient and hidden away. He had known exactly how to avoid being caught. But sitting here, with no one left to manage and nothing left to control, Daniel Reeves looked like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had finally dropped it. "I figured you came to tell me what I deserve," Daniel said at last. His voice was low and rough, not defensive, just tired. Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair. He took a breath. "I know what you deserve," Marcus said. "That is for a judge to decide. That is not why I am here." Daniel finally looked up. There was something searching in his eyes, like a man standing in a dark room, not sure if there was a floor beneath his next step. "Then why are you here?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. He thought about Noah running out of the darkness onto that highway. He thought about Lily in that storage room, with her tiny hidden clues scratched into walls and tied around door frames. He thought about the names on all those pages spread across the conference room tables that morning. He thought about a night, a long time ago, when he was 20 years old, and in a situation he could not get out of alone. A night when someone sat beside him without asking anything in return, and simply said, "I am not leaving you here." That someone had been Daniel. "Because I remember who you were," Marcus said. Daniel made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was bitter and hollow, and it died fast. "That person does not exist anymore," Daniel said. "I think he does," Marcus said. "I think that is exactly what terrifies you, because if he is still in there somewhere, then you know full well what you did." Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked away again. The room was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed, a distant sound of boots on a hard floor. Then silence again. Marcus did not rush. He had not come here to hurry through this moment. He had come here because he believed it needed to happen, not for his own sake. Maybe not even entirely for Daniel's, for the children, because the truth deserved to be spoken out loud. "You saved my life," Marcus said simply. I have never forgotten that. Not one day. And I am not going to stand in this room and pretend it did not happen." Something shifted in Daniel's face, just slightly, a tightness around his eyes. "You are not angry," Daniel said. It came out almost like a question. "I am plenty angry," Marcus said. "Do not mistake this for not caring what you did to those kids." He let that sit for a second. "But I learned a long time ago that anger is a fire. It will keep you warm for a little while. After that, it just burns you up from the inside." Daniel pressed his folded hands against his mouth for a moment. His shoulders dropped. "Forgiveness is not me saying it did not happen," Marcus continued. "It is not me telling you everything is fine. It is not me getting you out of what is coming. You are going to face every one of those consequences. You should." His voice did not waver. "But forgiveness means I am not going to let what you became destroy what you once were to me. And it means I believe a person can still choose something better. Even now." Daniel's eyes went red around the edges. His hands dropped to the table. He stared at Marcus, and in that stare, Marcus could see the exact moment it hit him. Not the charges, not the consequences, not the legal weight of everything closing in around him, the kindness. That was what broke him. Because it was the same kindness he had once given freely, and then, somewhere along the way, had convinced himself he no longer deserved to receive. His face crumpled. His shoulders shook once, hard, like something snapped loose inside him. And then Daniel Reeves, a man who had spent years keeping everything locked down and controlled, put his face in his hands and wept. The weeks after Daniel's arrest moved differently than Marcus expected. He had thought things would slow down. He had thought the hard part was over, and the world would simply go back to its regular rhythm. But life after a rescue does not work that way. The danger was gone. The fear was gone. What was left behind, though, was something quieter and harder to fix. Healing takes longer than rescue. He knew that. He had always known that. Every morning for the next several weeks, Marcus or one of his brothers pulled up outside Sarah Mitchell's shelter in pickup trucks, loaded with whatever the kids needed. School supplies, backpacks, new shoes, hot food in big aluminum trays that Ethan insisted on carrying inside himself because he said the handles were flimsy, and he did not trust anyone else not to spill everything. The first day back to school for most of the children was the hardest. Marcus stood outside the shelter that morning and watched a little girl named Rosa sit on the front step for almost 10 minutes before she could make herself get up. She was 8 years old. She had not been inside a classroom in months. She held her new backpack straps with both hands so tight her knuckles went pale. Marcus sat down beside her on the step. He did not say anything right away. After a moment, Rosa looked up at him. This huge man in a worn leather vest with a long gray streak in his dark beard and arms like old tree trunks, and she asked him very quietly, "What if they can see something is different about me?" Marcus looked at her. He kept his voice gentle. "Different is not the same as broken," he said. Rosa thought about that. Then she stood up, adjusted her backpack straps, and walked to the van. Marcus watched her go and had to clear his throat before he could talk to anyone else that morning. The bikers became a regular presence around the shelter and around the school runs and around the little community center on Birch Street, where Sarah had organized an after-school program for the kids. People in the neighborhood had stared at first. Some crossed the street. A few parents had questions, but the children had no questions. The children just knew who showed up every single day without being asked. That meant everything. Noah watched all of it. He had been staying at the shelter, too, helping where he could, still carrying the quiet weight of everything that had happened. he still had moments where guilt crept back in, where he lay awake and replayed the days before he found Marcus, wondering if he could have moved faster, or been smarter, or been braver earlier. But something was beginning to change in him. He noticed it one afternoon when a boy named Caleb started refusing to come out of his room. Caleb was 11, small for his age. He had been one of the quieter children pulled from the basement, and the transition back to normal life was hitting him harder than most. He would not talk to the counselors. He would not talk to Sarah. He barely talked to anyone. Noah knocked on his door with no plan, no speech prepared. He just sat down on the floor outside the room and talked through the door like it was nothing, like he had all the time in the world. He told Caleb about the night he ran down the highway, about how his legs were shaking so bad he nearly fell twice, about how he almost turned back because the dark felt too big and the fear felt too heavy, about how he kept going anyway because the thought of Lily alone was louder than the fear. He heard nothing from the other side of the door for a long time. Then the door opened. Just a crack. Caleb's eyes appeared in the gap. "You were really that scared?" Caleb asked. "Terrified," Noah said. "Every single second." Caleb opened the door a little wider. Noah did not stand up right away. He just stayed right there on the floor and let the boy decide when he was ready to step out. And in that moment, without anybody announcing it or making it official, Noah Carter stopped being the boy who needed rescuing and became the person doing the protecting. The community center on Birch Street had never been so full. Someone had strung white lights along the ceiling beams, and they gave the whole room a soft, warm glow. Folding chairs filled every inch of open floor. People sat shoulder to shoulder. Parents, neighbors, teachers from the school down the road, a few local officials who had heard what happened and wanted to see it for themselves. Children from the after-school program sat cross-legged on a strip of blue carpet near the front, their faces tipped upward and waiting. Marcus stood near the back wall with his arms folded and his shoulder pressed against the painted cinder block. Ethan was beside him. A few of the other brothers stood nearby, big, quiet men in worn leather vests, looking slightly out of place among the folding chairs and paper streamers, but not minding it one bit. Sarah had organized everything. She moved through the crowd with a clipboard and a calm smile, guiding people to their seats, answering questions, doing what she always did, which was hold everything together without making it look hard. Noah sat in the second row. He was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, watching the small wooden platform at the front of the room like something important was about to happen there. He was right. Lily Carter walked up to the microphone. She was small. She always had been. She wore a yellow sweater, and her dark hair was pulled back, and she held a single folded piece of paper in her hands. She looked out at the crowd, and for just a moment, she went completely still. Marcus watched her from the back of the room. He noticed her chin come up. Just slightly. Just enough. She unfolded the paper. Then she folded it right back up and set it on the edge of the podium. She had decided she did not need it. "I was scared every single day I was down there," she said. Her voice was steady, clear. It reached every corner of the room. "I did not know if anyone was looking for me. I did not know if my brother was okay. I did not know if the people above me were ever going to open that door and tell me I could go home." The room was completely silent. "But I knew one thing." She paused. "I knew that giving up was not the same thing as being safe, so I kept going." She talked about the thread she had tied near the doors, the initials she scratched into the walls behind broken equipment, the small drawings tucked beneath the work tables. She explained each one simply and plainly, the way a person talks when they are not trying to impress anyone, but just trying to tell the truth. Some people in the crowd were wiping their eyes. A woman near the middle had both hands pressed over her mouth. The children on the blue carpet were perfectly still. Every single one of them was watching Lily like she was saying the exact thing they had needed someone to say for a long time. "People ask me sometimes if I feel like a victim," Lily said, "and I understand why they ask. But no, I do not feel like a victim. I feel like someone who was in a very dark place and decided to leave a light on anyway." Noah dropped his head for a moment. His shoulders moved once. Then he lifted his face back up and kept watching his sister. Lily looked out at the children sitting closest to her. "If you are ever scared," she said, "and you feel like nobody is going to listen to you, please tell someone anyway. Please keep asking until someone hears you, because there are people out there who will come." She glanced toward the back of the room. "I know that now." Marcus stood up a little straighter. He thought about a girl who had been locked in a dark room and decided to fight back with pieces of thread and scratched initials. He thought about what it meant to face something that big and still refuse to disappear. Lily had not survived the basement. She had walked out of it and kept going. The building did not look the same. That was the first thing Noah noticed when he turned the corner onto the old gravel road and saw it standing there in the late afternoon sun. He slowed his steps without meaning to. Lily walked beside him, her hands tucked into the front pocket of her hoodie, and she slowed too. They both just stood there for a moment and looked at it. The outside walls had been repainted a clean, deep red. New wooden trim framed the windows. Someone had planted a row of small bushes along the front. Nothing fancy, just green and growing and alive. A wooden sign hung above the door. The letters had been carved by hand and stained a warm brown, Carter Community Workshop. Noah stared at the sign for a long time. He had not known about the name. Marcus had not told him. He felt something rise up in his chest that he could not quite name. Not quite sadness, not quite joy. Something that lived in the space between the two. Lily reached over and touched his arm. "Come on," she said quietly. They pushed open the front door. Inside, the smell was the first thing that hit them. Fresh sawdust and motor oil, and something faintly metallic. The clean, honest smell of work being done. Natural light poured through 3 new windows along the east wall, windows that had not been there before. The old floorboards had been sanded and sealed, and they caught the afternoon light and threw it back, warm and golden. Workbenches lined the walls. Real ones, sturdy and level, with pegboards mounted above them where tools hung in neat rows. A row of small engines sat on a long center table, each one partially taken apart, each one with a hand-written label beside it explaining what it was and what the student working on it had already figured out. There were kids in the room, 8 of them, maybe 9, ranging from about 10 years old up to 16 or so. Some were bent-over engines. Some were working with basic wiring kits. One girl near the far window was carefully sanding the edge of a small wooden box, her tongue pressed against the corner of her lip as she focused. Marcus stood near the center table with a wrench in his hand, talking through something with a boy who could not have been older than 12. The boy was nodding along, serious and attentive, like what Marcus was saying was the most important information he had ever received in his life. Ethan was on the other side of the room, showing 2 older kids how to properly lift and support a small engine block. His voice was calm and patient, nothing like the way most people probably imagined a man his size would talk to children. 2 other brothers worked nearby, helping, explaining, demonstrating. Big men in worn leather vests, moving carefully through the space so as not to crowd the kids, being deliberate about it without making it a big thing. Marcus looked up and saw Noah and Lily standing near the door. He set down his wrench. He said something quietly to the boy he had been working with and gave him a nod, and the boy went back to studying the engine on his own with a focused little frown. Marcus walked over. He did not say anything right away. He just looked at them both and let them take in the room around them. Lily turned slowly, eyes moving across the workbenches, the tools. The kids bent quietly over their projects. She looked at the windows. She looked at the light coming through them. She looked at the floor, polished and warm where it had once been cold concrete, and fear. Her eyes went still for a moment. Not empty, just full. "It does not feel like the same place," she said softly. Marcus looked around the room with her. "That was the whole point," he said. Noah looked at his sister. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the room full of children learning things in a place that had once only taken things away. He felt something in him settle, something that had been tight for a long time. The celebration happened on a Saturday evening. Someone had strung lights along the front of the building, simple white bulbs on thin wire, and they glowed warm and steady in the early autumn air. Tables had been set up outside on the gravel, covered with checkered cloths and loaded with food that people from the neighborhood had brought. Potato salad, cornbread, 2 enormous trays of ribs that Ethan had been tending since noon, a chocolate sheet cake with messy frosting that one of the younger kids had clearly helped decorate. It was not a fancy event. Nobody had planned it to be. That was what made it feel right. People filled the space around the building. Families from the neighborhood, a few teachers from the school down the road. Sarah Mitchell stood near the far table talking to a woman Noah did not recognize, her laugh carrying easily over the hum of conversation. Detective Bennett was there, too, out of her work clothes for once, holding a paper plate and actually smiling at something one of the older kids was telling her. The 16 Hells Angels stood in a loose group near the motorcycles, which were parked in a neat row along the gravel edge like always. They were big men, worn leather vests, rough hands, faces that had seen a lot of weather and a lot of years. But they were relaxed tonight, talking easily. A couple of them had paper plates, too. Ethan was laughing at something with his whole chest. They did not look dangerous. They looked like people who belonged somewhere. Noah stood at the edge of the gathering and watched it all for a moment. Lily was nearby, sitting on a wooden bench with 2 of the younger girls from the workshop, talking about something with her hands moving the way they did when she was excited. She caught his eye and smiled at him quickly before turning back. He found Marcus near the side of the building, standing a little apart from the main crowd the way Marcus sometimes did. Not because he was unfriendly, just because Marcus was a man who observed things, who took the whole room in before he said anything about it. Noah walked over to him. Marcus looked over as he approached and gave a short nod. For a moment, Noah just stood beside him. He watched the crowd, the lights, the kids running between the tables, the sound of all of it, the voices and the laughter and the low, steady thrum of something good. Then he took a breath. "I never really said it right," Noah started. His voice was steady but quiet. "I said thank you before, after everything happened. But I don't think I said what I actually meant." Marcus waited. "You didn't have to stay," Noah said. "After that night, after the basement and the cops and all of it, you could have gone home and that would have been enough. What you did was already more than anyone else ever did for us." He paused. "But you stayed. All of you did." He looked over at Ethan and the other brothers near the bikes. "You showed up the next day, and the day after that. You helped us figure out where to go and what to do next. You built that." He gestured toward the workshop behind them. "You put our name on it?" His voice caught just slightly on that last part. He pressed forward anyway. "I don't know how to explain what that means. I've been trying to find the right words for a while now, and I don't think the words exist." He looked at Marcus directly. "But I wanted you to know that I know the difference between someone who helps you in a crisis and someone who actually stays." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at the building. He looked at the lights. He looked at Lily on the bench, laughing with the two little girls beside her. Then he looked at Noah. "You know what family actually is?" Marcus said. His voice was low and even. Noah shook his head just slightly. "It's not blood," Marcus said. "It's not a name on a piece of paper." He paused. "Family is the people who choose to stay, who show up not because they have to, but because they care about what happens to you." Marcus let the noise of the celebration wash over him. He did not move from his spot near the side of the building. He just stood there with his arms loose at his sides and let himself be still for a moment. The lights strung along the front of the building caught the breeze and shifted gently. The laughter from the tables carried over to him in warm waves. He thought about the night it all started. The highway. The dark stretch of road. The way the headlights had caught Noah stumbling out of the tree line, barely standing, his shirt torn, and his face bruised, and his whole body shaking like a leaf in a storm. Marcus had seen a lot of things in his life. Seen people scared, seen people hurt. But there was something about that boy's eyes that had cut right through everything. Not panic. Desperation. The kind that comes from being completely out of options. He thought about the moment he made the call. "Start your engines." All of it happening in maybe 30 seconds. 15 brothers looking at him over their handlebars in the dark, and not a single one of them saying no. Not one hesitation. Just engines turning over one by one until the sound of them filled the whole night. That still meant something to him. He thought about the basement, the false wall, the smell of oil and metal and something stale underneath it. The children bent over workbenches in the harsh light, too tired to look up right away, too used to being invisible. One small girl had flinched when Ethan stepped close, and Ethan had crouched down slow and easy, the way you do with someone who has learned that big men mean trouble, and he had said quietly, "You're okay now, I promise." Marcus had watched that moment and felt something shift deep in his chest. He thought about Lily, finding her in that back room. The way Noah had gone completely to pieces the moment he saw her, all his bravery dissolving at once, his whole body dropping down beside her. And Lily, small and pale and exhausted, putting her arms around her brother like she was comforting him instead of the other way around. He thought about the trail she had left, the scratched initials, the threads, the little drawings tucked under the edge of the work tables. She had not given up. Not once. She had kept her mind working and her hope alive, and she had believed somehow that someone would come. Marcus pressed his back against the wall of the building and breathed slowly. He thought about Daniel. That was the part that still sat heavy. Not with anger anymore. The anger had burned through a long time ago. What was left was something quieter and harder to name. Sadness, maybe. The particular kind that comes from watching someone waste what they had. Daniel had been sharp and funny and loyal once. He had dragged Marcus out of a bad situation years ago without being asked, without expecting anything back, just because it was the right thing to do. And then life had worn him down in ways Marcus had not seen coming. He had not excused it. He never would. What Daniel did to those children was not something you explained away. But Marcus had sat across from him and chosen to see a man instead of a monster, had chosen to say the hard thing out loud. You saved my life once, that matters, but it does not give you the right to take something from someone else. He did not know if it helped Daniel. He hoped it did. He looked out at the gravel lot now, at the families and the food and the warm light. He looked at the kids running between the tables. He looked at Lily's hands moving through the air as she talked. He looked at Noah standing nearby, watching his sister with quiet relief all over his face. Marcus had spent most of his adult life being the person people crossed the street to avoid. The person they looked at and made up their minds about before he said a single word. Being feared had never meant anything to him, not really, but he had accepted it as just the shape of his life. He had not known it could look like this instead. Not feared. Trusted. That was the word that settled into him now and stayed there. He had become someone that a boy with nowhere left to run had sprinted toward in the dark. Someone that frightened children had looked up at and slowly, carefully decided to believe. Someone that Noah and Lily and a whole basement full of scared kids had chosen to rely on when every other door had closed. That was not something he had planned. It was not something he had earned through reputation or years of loyalty or anything he could point to and say, that is where it came from. It had come from one choice. Kneel down, ask where she is, start the engines, and then stay. Marcus looked at the lights along the front of the building and felt something quiet and full settle inside him. This was it. This was the thing he had been working toward without ever knowing it. The morning of the ride came in slow and golden. The sun climbed above the tree line in long, soft ribbons of light, catching the chrome on 16 motorcycles lined up in the parking lot of the community center. The building stood clean and bright in the early morning glow. A fresh coat of paint covered the walls. A hand-painted sign hung above the entrance that read, Safe Hands Community Center. The letters a little uneven, but full of care. Marcus walked the row of bikes slowly. He ran one hand along the handlebar of his own motorcycle and let the cool metal settle him. The engine was ready. The tank was full. Everything was in order. But what was behind him was something he had not expected when the day first appeared on the calendar. People. Dozens of them. They were already gathering along the edge of the parking lot, setting up folding chairs and pouring coffee from big silver thermoses, families with kids perched on their fathers' shoulders, old men in lawn chairs with cups balanced on their knees, a group of teenagers sitting along the low brick wall near the entrance, laughing about something. The same town that had once watched Marcus and his brothers from the far side of the street was now here before 8 in the morning, just to see them off. He stopped walking and stood still for a moment. Ethan appeared at his shoulder. He had a cup of coffee in each hand, and he held one out without saying anything. Marcus took it. They stood side by side and looked at the crowd. You believe this? Ethan said. His voice was low but warm. Not entirely, Marcus said. Ethan made a sound that was almost a laugh. Me either. One of the kids from along the brick wall got brave and jogged over toward the bikes. He stopped a few feet away and looked up at Ethan's motorcycle with wide eyes, the way kids do when something is too impressive to fully process. Ethan crouched down, same as he had done in the basement, slow and easy. You want to see it up close? He asked. The boy nodded so hard his whole head moved. Ethan walked him over and let him press his hand flat against the gas tank and feel the cool metal, and the boy's mouth dropped open a little like he had been handed something sacred. Marcus watched that and felt the same quiet shift in his chest he had been feeling for months now. It never got smaller. It just kept being there. The brothers began gathering near their bikes, pulling on jackets and gloves, checking gear with easy and practiced hands. There was the usual noise of it. The jokes, the ribbing, the sound of boots on pavement. But underneath all of it was something steady and good. The kind of feeling that comes from knowing exactly why you are doing something. The charity they were riding for today was a fund that helped displaced children get school supplies, clothing, and temporary housing. It had started as a small idea around a folding table 3 months ago. It had grown quickly. Sarah had organized the donation tables set up near the entrance. She was already there, clipboard in hand, smiling at a family who had come to drop off a bag of backpacks. She caught Marcus's eye across the lot and gave a small nod. He nodded back. One by one the engines turned over, deep and steady, filling the morning air with a sound that rolled across the lot and lifted into the clear sky. The crowd stirred and moved a little closer. A few people clapped. A little girl near the front row covered her ears with both hands, but was grinning. Marcus settled onto his seat and felt the familiar vibration move through him. He looked toward the front of the building. Noah and Lily were standing together just past the entrance, close to the road. Noah had one arm around his sister's shoulders. Lily was already waving, big and wide, her whole arm moving. Noah lifted his hand and held it there. Marcus raised 2 fingers off the handlebar. The line of motorcycles began to roll forward, and the crowd cheered. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.